The great hall was a cavernous chamber, its high stone walls echoing faintly with the soft murmur of Yorkist retainers gathered beyond the heavy oaken doors. Flickering torches lined the walls, casting a restless dance of shadows across the cold flagstones. Sir Edmund Mallory's boots fell silent against the floor as he approached the dais where Lord Richard Devereux awaited. His heart beat a steady rhythm beneath his breastplate, a metronome of resolve and unease. Clad in the sombre grey and white livery of House York, Edmund's weathered features were drawn tight with the weight of his choice. He had crossed a chasm few of his kin dared to traverse, leaving behind the familiar banners of Lancaster to pledge himself to the rival house. The cost was incalculable, yet survival demanded such sacrifices. Lord Richard stood tall, his sharp features framed by a cloak of deep black velvet embroidered with the white rose of York. His piercing eyes, cold and calculating, fixed upon Edmund with an intensity that seemed to strip away pretense. The flickering torchlight caught the glint of a thin scar running from temple to jawline, a testament to battles fought both in the field and in the shadows of court intrigue. "Sir Edmund Mallory," Richard intoned, his voice low and commanding, "you stand before me, a knight who once pledged sword and blood to Lancaster. Speak now, why should I trust the loyalty of one who has turned his back on his birthright?" Edmund lowered his gaze briefly, the weight of those words settling like a stone in his chest. Yet he met Richard's gaze with steady eyes. "My lord, loyalty is not given lightly, nor is it blind. The tides of war have shifted, and with them the path to protect those I hold dear. I pledge to House York not out of betrayal, but out of necessity and conviction that it may yet bring peace to this fractured land." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Richard's lips. "Necessity is the mother of many alliances. Very well, Sir Edmund. We shall see if your actions speak louder than your words." The hall seemed to hold its breath as Edmund knelt, lowering his sword in a solemn oath. The clang of steel against stone rang out, reverberating through the chamber and sealing his fate. Around him, whispers stirred, some welcoming, others laden with suspicion. The delicate balance of trust was fragile, and Edmund knew that every step forward would be shadowed by doubt. Outside the chamber, Lady Eleanor waited in the quiet dusk, her silhouette framed by the stained glass windows that filtered the fading light into shards of colour. Her eyes, sharp and resolute, flickered with a mixture of hope and apprehension. She had counselled caution, yet beneath her calm exterior swirled a tempest of fear for the man she loved and the uncertain future that awaited them both. The corridors of York's stronghold were alive with murmurs and guarded glances as Edmund moved through the ranks of retainers and courtiers. Each whispered word was a thread in the intricate web of alliances and betrayals that defined this court. Edmund's mind raced, weighing every smile, every glance, every silence. Here, power was a blade as sharp as any sword, and suspicion could prove deadlier than an enemy's arrow. Retreating to a small chamber away from prying eyes, Edmund allowed himself a moment of solitude. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the rough-hewn walls as he sank into a wooden chair, the weight of the day pressing down upon him. His thoughts churned with memories of the past and the uncertain road ahead. He had crossed a line from which there was no return. The distant clang of armour and the muted voices beyond the door reminded him that the war was far from over. Yet within this silence, a fierce determination took root. Edmund Mallory was no longer the idealistic knight of Lancaster's minor house. He was a man forged by hardship and necessity, ready to navigate the treacherous currents of ambition and loyalty that defined the Wars of the Roses. And as the night deepened, so too did the shadows that would test his courage, his honor, and the very survival of all he held dear. The choice made was irrevocable, the path ahead uncertain, fraught with peril and promise alike. Edmund's fate, and that of his family, now lay intertwined with the ruthless designs of Lord Richard Devereux and the relentless struggle for England's crown. But in that solemn chamber, beneath the weight of oath and expectation, one truth remained clear in the ashes of loyalty. A new allegiance had been forged, one that would change the course of a war and the soul of a man. The first step had been taken, but the journey was just beginning. The question lingered in the stillness. How far would Edmund go to survive, and what would he sacrifice along the way? Outside, the night wind whispered through the battlements, carrying with it the promise of battles yet to come. The great hall of Middleham Castle was alive with a restless energy, its stone walls echoing the murmur of courtiers and the clinking of goblets. Flickering torchlight cast long shadows that danced like spectres across the tapestries depicting heraldic beasts and battles long past. Sir Edmund Mallory stood near the northern wall, his posture wary yet composed, eyes scanning the gathered nobles with a mixture of calculation and caution. The transition from loyal Lancastrian to reluctant Yorkist had not been kind to him. Here, in the heart of enemy territory, every glance felt like a blade's edge. Lord Richard Devereux, the cold architect of York's ascendancy, presided over the gathering with an imperious air. His sharp features, framed by a crown of dark hair streaked prematurely with grey, betrayed no hint of emotion beyond a calculating chill. Edmund had met him once before, a brief encounter laden with veiled threats and thinly veiled promises. Tonight, as Devereux surveyed his court like a spider surveying a web, Edmund felt the full weight of his antagonist's gaze, an unspoken reminder that power was a game played at ruthless stakes. Amid the throng, Lady Eleanor Mallory moved with grace, her eyes sharp beneath her veil. The court had become a labyrinth for her as well, a place where every whispered word might carry consequences. Her secret correspondence a series of carefully coded letters to a Yorkist sympathizer was a precarious thread connecting her to unseen allies. Threads that could either bolster Edmund's fragile standing or unravel it completely. Tonight, her resolve faltered beneath the burden of divided loyalty. Earlier in the day, Eleanor had stolen away to a small chamber near the servants' quarters, a modest room where the scent of burning tallow clung to the air. Heart-pounding, she slipped a folded letter beneath a loose floorboard, her hands trembling as footsteps echoed faintly in the corridor. The risk of discovery was immense. If the wrong eyes found her secret, it could mean ruin not only for Edmund but for their entire family. Yet the need to influence Yorkist politics from within to protect her husband's position compelled her onward. Meanwhile, tensions simmered openly at the feast. Sir Thomas Grey, his scarred visage illuminated by the glow of the hearth, prowled the edges of the gathering. His eyes, like sharpened flint, found Edmund's across the crowded hall. There was no need for words. The silent challenge was clear. Their personal vendetta, rooted in a bitter duel and compounded by the wider war, was a constant undercurrent to the political intrigue. Grey represented the unforgiving reality of ambition unchecked, a reminder that Edmund's choices had placed him in the crosshairs of men who saw no room for mercy. As the night deepened, Edmund found a moment of respite in the castle courtyard. The chill of the evening air bit at his skin, but the moon's pale light revealed the steadfast presence of Eleanor beside him. Their conversation was hushed, voices low enough to be swallowed by the night. "The court is a dangerous place," Edmund murmured, the weight of his doubts heavy in his tone. Eleanor nodded, her eyes reflecting the fragile hope that still lingered despite the darkness. "We tread a fine line, Edmund. One misstep, and all is lost." Their hands met briefly, a silent pact of resilience and shared burden. Yet beneath the surface lay unspoken fears of betrayal, of loss, and of the compromises that survival demanded. Back inside, the web of intrigue tightened. Rumors whispered through the corridors, alliances shifted like sand, and every gesture held a double meaning. Edmund's strategic mind worked tirelessly, passing threats and opportunities alike. But the price was steep. Loyalty was no longer a simple matter of honor. It was a currency, a weapon, and occasionally a shackle. Lady Eleanor's secret letters became a focal point of suspicion. A careless glance from a curious servant, a hushed conversation overheard risked exposing their precarious position. Edmund found himself torn between gratitude for her cunning and frustration at the dangers it invited. The chapter closed on a note of simmering tension. Edmund stood at the crossroads of ambition and survival, surrounded by enemies and uncertain allies. The court was a spider's nest, and every step could mean entrapment or escape. As he prepared for the battles both political and personal that lay ahead, the question loomed: could he preserve his integrity amid the treacherous tides, or would he be consumed by the very web he sought to navigate? The night deepened, and with it, the shadows of doubt and danger. Edmund's story was far from over, but the path forward was veiled in uncertainty, promising trials that would test the very core of his being. The game of power had begun anew, and the stakes had never been higher. The dawn broke over the rolling hills of Tewkesbury, the chill mist still lingering in the air like a ghostly shroud. Sir Edmund Mallory stood at the crest of a small rise, his armour dulled by the morning dew, his keen eyes scanning the horizon where the Yorkist banners flickered in the pale light. Around him, his men loyal but wary prepared for the battle to come, tightening straps and whispering hurried prayers. The air was thick with tension, the scent of damp earth mingling with the metallic temps of sharpened blades. Edmund's heart beat a steady drum of grim determination. This was no mere skirmish. It was a decisive engagement that could tip the fragile balance of power in this fracturing land. He thought of Lady Eleanor and the fragile peace that had so far shielded his family. He thought of his father's tales of chivalry, now shattered by the cruel realities of civil war. His grip tightened on the hilt of his sword as he gave the order to prepare for advance. The sun barely pierced the grey veil of dawn when the first arrows darkened the sky, a sudden cruel rain that screamed towards them with deadly intent. The ambush was sprung with merciless precision. Horses reared and screamed. Men cried out as shafts found flesh and bone. The ground beneath their feet turned to mud, slick with blood and sweat, as chaos erupted like a tempest. Edmund shouted commands, his voice cutting through the cacophony as he rallied his men to hold the line. Steel clanged against steel in a brutal symphony of war. Faces twisted with pain and rage passed before him, friends and foes alike caught in the deadly dance. The Yorkist forces, led by the ruthless Lord Richard Devereux, pressed relentlessly, their cold ambition fueling their savage assault. Amidst the turmoil, Edmund caught sight of Sir Thomas Grey, his scarred adversary leading a ferocious charge that threatened to break their ranks. A flash of recognition and bitter rivalry surged through Edmund's veins. They clashed in a whirlwind of blades, each strike heavy with the weight of personal vendettas and the larger war that engulfed them. The battle's tide shifted suddenly when Edmund saw Captain Robert Hale fall beneath a shattered oak, his armour battered and his breath ragged. Edmund fought his way through the throng to reach him, the world narrowing to the sight of his loyal commander's fading strength. "Hold on, Robert," Edmund urged, his voice thick with desperation. But Hale's eyes, clouded with pain, met Edmund's with a silent farewell. The loss struck Edmund like a physical blow, shaking the very foundation of his resolve. Yet, amidst the heartbreak, a grim clarity took hold. Survival was no longer a matter of honor alone. It was a necessity that demanded sacrifice and ruthlessness. As night fell, the battlefield was a smoldering ruin. Edmund, bloodied and broken, staggered away from the carnage, the distant sounds of pursuit chasing him through the cold dark. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the ghosts of the fallen and the heavy cost of ambition. Every step away from the slaughter deepened the shadow in Edmund's heart. He had survived, but at what price? The faces of lost comrades haunted his thoughts, and the fragile line between loyalty and betrayal blurred beneath the weight of war. His journey had irrevocably changed. The idealistic knight was fading, replaced by a man forged in the desperate fires of survival. Yet as dawn promised another day, Edmund's eyes hardened with resolve. He would endure, he must. The battle for England's soul raged on, and so would he. But in the quiet moments before the next storm, Edmund wondered, could honor survive in a world consumed by ashes? The answer lay buried beneath the bloodied fields of Tewkesbury, waiting to be unearthed. The war was far from over, and so was his story. The battlefield lay silent, save for the occasional rustle of dry leaves, stirred by a cold, biting wind. Sir Edmund Mallory stood alone amid the wreckage of what had only hours before been a furious clash of steel and blood. Around him, the earth was torn and scarred, littered with broken weapons and scattered banners. The vivid colors dulled beneath a grim shroud of dust and ash. The acrid scent of smoke mingled with the coppery temps of blood, hanging heavy in the air like a suffocating fog. His boots pressed into soft earth, stained dark with the lifeblood of friends and foes alike. Edmund's keen eyes swept the horizon, searching the tangle of fallen bodies and splintered carts for any sign of survivors. But the field was mercilessly quiet. The sun dipped low, its golden light fading into the shrouded dusk, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the desolation. His heart tightened in his chest. Each figure he recognized, each face etched with pain or final stillness, was a weight pressing down upon his conscience. Kneeling among the dead was Brother Matthew, the monk whose calm presence had been a rare balm amid the chaos. His brown habit was smudged with soot and dirt, but his thin hands moved with deliberate grace as he arranged a few scattered bones and remnants of armor into a makeshift grave. Softly, he began to chant, his voice low and steady, threading ancient prayers into the heavy silence. The words hung in the cold air, wrapping the fallen in a fragile shroud of hope and remembrance. Edmund stepped closer, his throat tight, the voices of the battle still echoing in his mind, the clash of steel on steel, the desperate cries of men fighting for their lives, the anguished wails of those torn from this world too soon. The memories swirled around him like ghosts, relentless and accusing. He swallowed hard, the taste of ash and grief bitter on his tongue. "Brother Matthew," Edmund said quietly, his voice rough from disuse and emotion, "how can we bear such loss? How does one find peace when the price of war is so steep?" The monk looked up, his eyes soft but weary. "Peace is a stranger in times of bloodshed, Edmund. But faith is the lantern we carry through the darkest nights. It does not erase sorrow, but it guides us beyond it." Edmund's gaze dropped to the ground, where a battered shield lay half buried beside the grave. The emblem of Lancaster was barely discernible beneath the grime and dents. In that moment, the idealism that had once fueled his loyalty seemed fragile and distant. The war was no longer a matter of honor or righteous cause. It was a brutal calculus of survival and sacrifice. He thought of Lady Eleanor, her resolute eyes and quiet strength a beacon amid the storm. How would she bear this news? How many more would fall before an end came? The thought tightened his chest with a mixture of fear and determination. Yet, beneath it all, a shadow crept an unsettling hint that the path forward might demand choices he could scarcely imagine. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves and carrying the faint cries of crows circling overhead. Edmund shivered, not from the cold, but from the weight of a dawning realization. The war was far from over, and the man he had been was slipping away, replaced by someone forged in the crucible of loss and necessity. As twilight deepened, Edmund and Brother Matthew made their way back to the encampment. The campfires burned low, flickering weakly against the gathering darkness. Around them, soldiers nursed wounds and quietly mourned, their faces etched with exhaustion and despair. The night was heavy with unspoken fears and the fragile hope that dawn might bring a reprieve. Settling beside a dying fire, Edmund drew his cloak tighter and glanced at the monk. "Tell me, brother, is it madness to hope? Or is hope the only madness left to us?" Matthew's eyes met his, steady and sure. "Hope is the seed from which courage grows, even in the bleakest soil. You carry it still, Edmund, though it may feel buried beneath the ashes." The knight closed his eyes, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows across his weathered face. The echoes of the fallen surrounded him, their silent voices urging him forward. He knew the road ahead would demand all he had and more. But in this moment of shared solitude and reflection, a fragile ember of resolve kindled within him. The battle had taken much, but it had not yet claimed his spirit, not entirely. Yet, as the fire sputtered and dimmed, a new uncertainty settled over Edmund's heart. How far would he bend to survive? At what cost would honor be sacrificed for life? The questions gnawed at him, relentless and unforgiving, as the night deepened around the weary survivors. The war was no longer a distant storm. It was the very air they breathed, the ground beneath their feet, the shadows that stretched long into the future. And Edmund Mallory stood at its heart, a man transformed by loss, caught between the flickering light of hope and the encroaching darkness of despair. Outside the camp, the first stars blinked awake in the vast, indifferent sky. Somewhere beyond the hills, the drums of conflict beat on, relentless and unyielding, and Edmund, burdened yet unbroken, prepared to face whatever dawn might bring. The evening air hung heavy within the stone walls of Mallory Hall, a silence punctuated only by the faint crackle of the hearth's dying embers. Sir Edmund Mallory sat brooding in the great chamber, his gaunt face half illuminated by the flickering candlelight. His keen eyes, usually so guarded and resolute, now reflected a rare uncertainty, like a man standing on the edge of a precipice, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. Across from him, Lady Eleanor stood tall, her elegant frame silhouetted against the darkened window. The moon's pale light traced the curves of her resolute features, eyes sharp and unyielding. Between them lay a tension as palpable as steel drawn in battle, forged from secrets and distrust that neither dared fully voice. "Edmund," Eleanor began, her voice low yet firm, "you cannot afford to ignore the currents shifting beneath our feet. The Yorkists grow bolder. I have seen the letters whispers of alliance, promises made in shadows. If we do not act, we will be cast aside like refuse when the tide turns." Edmund's jaw tightened. "I am aware of the danger, Eleanor, but survival demands caution, not reckless gambits. Our loyalty lies with Lancaster still. To betray now would be to risk everything, our honor, our family's name. Honor, she repeated softly, stepping closer. Is honor worth death? Your lord is betrayed, our lands threatened. We skirt the edge of oblivion, and yet you cling to ideals that no longer shield us. I do what I must to protect us all, even if that means speaking with those you would call enemies. The words struck Edmund like a cold blade. He looked away, out toward the battlements, where the night sky stretched bleak and unyielding. I fear your counsel risks more than you admit. A single misstep, a letter found, and all we hold dear is lost. Eleanor's eyes softened for a moment, but the resolve remained. Better to act than to wait for ruin to claim us. Their fragile dialogue was shattered by a sudden, hurried knock at the chamber door. A breathless servant entered, clutching a folded parchment with trembling hands. My lord, a letter was found, hidden in the courtyard. It bears the seal of York. The room stilled, the weight of the revelation pressing down like a stone on Edmund's chest. He took the letter, fingers tightening around the paper as if it were a serpent ready to strike. Lady Eleanor's gaze met his, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The secret was out. The fragile trust within the household had cracked. Later that night, in the quiet solitude of the chapel, Brother Matthew knelt before the altar. The flickering candles cast shadows that danced upon his aged face, his lips moving in a whispered prayer. The war's cruel hand had not spared the innocent nor the devout. He sought guidance, pleading for mercy in a world where faith was tested by blood and betrayal. Meanwhile, Edmund stood alone at the battlements, the cold wind biting through his worn cloak. The banners of York and Lancaster fluttered distantly in the chill darkness, symbols of a fractured land that mirrored the turmoil within his soul. He pondered the cost of ambition, the price of loyalty, and the uncertain path that lay before him. The walls of Mallory Hall, once a sanctuary, now seemed a prison forged from divided hearts and dangerous secrets. Edmund knew that the choices made in the coming days would shape not only his fate but the legacy of all he held dear. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a pale glow upon the scarred earth, a single question haunted him. Could a house so divided stand against the gathering storm? The war outside was not the only battle to be fought. Within these walls, trust was a fragile thread, and the slightest unraveling threatened to send all into ruin. Edmund's pragmatic resolve wavered as the shadows of doubt lengthened, and the path forward blurred into a perilous maze of loyalty, ambition, and survival. And yet, amid the uncertainty, a flicker of determination burned. For if the Mallory name was to endure, it would be forged not through blind honor, but through the ruthless clarity demanded by a world consumed by war. The night was far from over, and the house divided within would soon face the reckoning that history had long foretold. With a deep breath, Edmund turned from the battlements, steeling himself for the trials to come. The fragile peace within his home had shattered, and the game of power was entering its deadliest phase. The choices made now would echo through the halls of time, and the ashes of the crown would bear witness to the cost of ambition and the resilience of a man caught between loyalty and survival. The candle flickered once more before sputtering out, leaving the chamber cloaked in darkness. And in the silence, the war whispered on. The great hall of York's court was a cavernous expanse, its high vaulted ceilings lost in shadow, but for the flickering torchlight that cast long dancing shapes upon the stone walls. The air was thick with the scent of burning wax and the faint musk of damp earth, mingling with the subtle odours of spiced wine and the faintest trace of sweat from the assembled nobles. Sir Edmund Mallory stepped cautiously through the throng, his boots echoing softly on the flagstones, every sense alert to the murmurs and glances that swirled around him like a gathering storm. He was a man caught between worlds, a minor knight recently pledged to House York, yet still branded by his Lancastrian past. His weathered face, marked by years of campaigning, bore a guarded expression as keen eyes flicked from one polished face to another. The nobles here wore their power like armor, their embroidered silks and velvets shimmering under the wavering light, each gesture calculated, each smile a potential blade. At the far end of the hall, Lord Richard Devereux presided like a spider at the center of a vast web. The sharp lines of his face were carved in shadow and light, his cold, calculating eyes sweeping the room with a predator's precision. Edmund felt those eyes settle upon him, weighing, measuring, dissecting. It was a silent challenge, one that demanded more than mere words. Approaching the seat of power, Edmund was intercepted by a cluster of courtiers, their conversations halting as he neared. Polite greetings masked sharp undertones. Compliments were veiled threats. Edmund's throat tightened. The game was merciless, and he was a new player, untested in these perilous waters. As the evening wore on, Edmund found himself summoned to a private chamber, where the flicker of candlelight revealed Lord Richard in full. The room was small, lined with dark tapestries depicting scenes of conquest and dominion, the air heavy with the scent of burning tallow and old parchment. Devereux's voice was low, each word deliberate. "Sir Edmund, your arrival here is noted with interest. York does not tolerate weakness. Loyalty is not merely professed, it is proved in deeds." His eyes glinted with a sharpness that cut deeper than any sword. "Tell me, are you prepared to cast off the shadows of your past and embrace the future we forge? Or will you remain shackled by honor that serves no man but yourself?" Edmund's jaw clenched. The question was a gauntlet thrown, an invitation to betray or be broken. He knew survival demanded pragmatism, yet the sting of compromise gnawed at his conscience. Meanwhile, outside the formalities of the court, Lady Eleanor moved with quiet purpose. In a dim corner of the courtyard, beneath the ancient oaks whose branches clawed at the night sky, she exchanged a folded note with a cloaked figure. Her eyes, resolute yet shadowed with anxiety, scanned the surroundings before slipping the parchment into her sleeve. The secret correspondence was a fragile lifeline, a thread pulling at the fabric of loyalty that bound her family. Each whispered word risked exposure, and with it, ruin. Her heart pounded with the knowledge that the fate of Edmund and their lineage might hinge upon this dangerous game of shadows. Back in the hall, Edmund found moments of solitude, scarce but precious. On a stone balcony that overlooked the courtyard, the chill of the night air bit through his cloak. The revelry within was muffled behind thick walls. Laughter and music seemed distant, almost unreal. His breath rose in white clouds as he gazed out over the darkened landscape, the weight of the court's intrigues settling upon him like a leaden shroud. He thought of the men he had lost, the ideals eroding beneath the relentless tide of ambition and betrayal. The Spider's Court was no place for the faint-hearted or the upright. Here, every alliance was a thread in a web that might just as easily strangle as support. A sudden noise drew his attention, the faint scuff of footsteps below. Edmund's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his sword, but the figure that emerged from the shadows was Lady Margaret Beaufort. Her expression was inscrutable, her eyes reflecting the flickering torchlight with a cold intelligence. "Sir Edmund," she said softly, "be mindful where your loyalties lie. In this court, the line between friend and foe is thinner than a razor's edge." Her words were both warning and prophecy, a reminder that in the pursuit of power, morality was often the first casualty. As the night deepened, Edmund was left to navigate a labyrinth of whispered threats and veiled promises. Each smile concealed a dagger. Each handshake might be the last. The ambition that Lord Richard Devereux wielded like a weapon was a poison that seeped into every corner of the court, corrupting trust and twisting alliances. Edmund's resolve hardened. To survive, he must learn to weave his own web, to balance honor against necessity. Yet the cost was clear. Every step deeper into this world risked the loss of the very self he struggled to preserve. The court's shadows lengthened, and the spider watched. Edmund's thoughts spiraled back to Lady Eleanor's secret note, to the fragile hope and peril it represented. The game was set, the pieces moving inexorably toward a reckoning that none could avoid. In the heart of York's court, power was a flame that consumed all who dared approach it unguarded. And Edmund Mallory, once a minor knight of simple loyalty, now stood at a crossroads where ambition and survival demanded the ultimate price. The night whispered of treachery yet to come, and the spider's web tightened inexorably around its prey.